Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of Blucher by Sam Mustafa, who has his website, sammustafa.com, or the Honor website. If you just search on Google for Sam Mustafa or Honor together, you'll find his website and you'll find this for sale. This is actually quite an old book now, 2014, so we're coming on for nearly 10 years old. It is still available. I have checked. It's available on the Sam Mustafa website, as I mentioned. You'll probably be able to get hard copies of it elsewhere as well. $45 for the hardback, which I have. I bought this when it came out, and also I think it's $21 for the PDF version, which you can obviously get printed or whatever. It's about 176 pages in hardback. It's a luscious book, actually. It's a really nice read. And, well, I should tell you what it is actually. It's about playing big battle Napoleonic games at pretty much any scale. So it is what we would call these days scale agnostic. I play it in 6mm. I think it would work very well in 2mm. I've seen it played in 28mm, 15mm. And it is basically also base size agnostic as well, which is really nice. The smallest unit is a brigade, so we're talking tens of thousands of men really, but it's kind of elastic in that, so it could go quite small, it could go quite big. I have videos elsewhere on the channel of my 100 days campaign of forces for Blucher, and each of those is a brigade. I've got Napoleon's Grand Armée, and I've also got Wellington's army as well for Blucher, and then the bases I use are about 3 inches by 2 inches, so playing card size. It's a really nice abstracted set of rules. So it's that telescoping out of the command level. You are at brigade level, you are using corps, so you're an army commander rather than, you're more like, Napoleon rather than, say, I don't know, Halkett, for example. You are moving around large bodies of men, and what those men are doing doesn't really matter so much. It's where they are on the battlefield, and that is really the abstraction in this. So you are not looking at men, forces forming into various formations. There's no such thing in this as a line, a column, or a square. It is accepted in the rules that they are already doing what is best at the time that they are doing it on the battlefield, and that I really like. I think it's a really nice way of abstracting the game out, and I think it just really works from that point of view, just to recreate those epic titanic struggles. And you could probably get a game done if both of you know the rules. A 2-player game, obviously. Oh well, you could play with quite a few. You could play it probably in about 2 or 3 hours, so it can easily fit into a club game if you want it to, and you will get a nice outcome at the end of it as well, which is always good. I'll just quickly read you the back of it. It says, Blucher is a tabletop game of great battles of the Napoleonic Wars. Command on an entire army, from the first reconnaissance of the enemy to the deployment of forces and husbanding of reserves, to the bombardments and engagements and the final commitment to the elite shock troops that will shatter the enemy's weary defenders. Blucher can be played with miniature figures, terrain, or with unit cards, which I have as well, on any flat surface. You may in fact use both the same game, since the cards provide a wonderful fog of war, which we'll talk about when I look in the rules more properly. It conceals your forces until they're close enough to the enemy to be identified and represented in miniature figures. It says the basic game is compact introduction to Napoleonic warfare for 2 players to complete in 3 hours or less on a modest table. And the fully advanced game, which is included in this, large battles, multiplayer games, a complete army and battle creation system for fictional scenarios, including 9 army lists for various different forces, and also a campaign system as well. This is actually built into the rules, so you don't have to buy anything extra. You literally can just buy this book and you've got everything to go. Guidelines for players who want to create their own historical scenarios from famous battles, and then detailed rules for things like national differences between armies, personalities of commanders and sub-commanders, and many traits and attributes of different unit types. And I think, to be perfectly fair, it does this in spades. I think it is a really good introductory set of rules for people who want to play Napoleonics. In particular, big battle Napoleonics. And it is the rules are simple enough to hold in your head as well, because they're abstracted. Literally, you know, we'll get to this in the rules themselves. But basically, when you're firing, if you roll a 6, you've hit. If you're attacking, that is, you know, close combat, you roll a 4, you've hit, or 4, you've defended. And it is that simple. You know, there's very few modifiers, and most of the modifiers are on the dice rather than anything else, or forcing you to re-roll. So it's very, very quick play in that respect. So it's a very nice, concise, condensed set of Napoleonic rules. There's no measuring frontage of units, or, you know, the amount of muskets you can bring to bear, or the amount of casualties that are being caused by the fire. And I think once again that is a great thing. You have a tracker which is called the Elan tracker, and that is basically acting as a force morale for each of the units. They all have them. I'd say on average, I think it's about 6. If you're a conscript, it might go down to 4. If you're something like the Imperial Guard, it will go up to 8. If you're the British Guards, it's about 7. So about 6 is about average, you know, a well-trained troop. And this, every time you attack, it reduces your elan. So it's basically, you know, slowing you down the more you attack with those units. And also, you know, it's causing trouble for the enemy as well, because they will be taking elan hits. So it's also an attritional game, in that you are slowly grinding out your enemy, but you also then definitely have to have a fresh reserve in the rear to be able to just pounce in once they have been ground down to a certain point and to wipe them out. Very nice, very good. You know, as I say, you could play it within a 2 or 3 hour window at a club, and, you know, what more do you want from a Napoleonic game? What we'll do is we'll have a look through the rules themselves. I'll show you how they work a little bit. I've got a couple of Blucher after action reports on the channel already, and I've been meaning to make this video for a while, so I'm happy to do it. And it is actually one of my favourite games, I think, because it's a really nice, easy pick up and play game. And with the cards in particular, you could, you know, play Blucher quite happily without having to paint up thousands of figures, unlike what I did. Alright, so we'll jump into the book itself. We'll go through the different sections, and we'll talk about them as they come up, and talk about what is good and what isn't. And to be fair, there isn't a great deal of stuff that isn't good in this book from my point of view. So, as I say, this is the hardcover version of this book. Lovely picture of old Blucher on the front there. As you can see, hard copy both sides. As I say, 2014 is when it was released. I think there's something like 176 pages. There you go, a couple of end pages as well. And as you can see, full colour on the inside as well, which is always nice to see, I think. It's a really nice book as well. Just to mention this, really, from an aesthetic point of view, it's ergonomically, it's very easy to read because it's not too big. A lot of rules are, you know, quite big things. This one over here is not so big, which is quite nice. I really like it. I'm just going to mention as well, I don't know if you'll be watching this, but we've got my mate Paul Clarkey mentioned in there as well, so that's lovely to see. It is dotted throughout with illustrations of the period, as well as figures and things, and also some examples of play and that kind of stuff. You know, again, it's just a nicely put together, well presented book, I think. This is our table of contents. I don't think there's an index in this, if I remember correctly. Let me just double check to the back. I can't remember. So I mean, all right. I mean, that's a negative point. Oh no, it's got a small index, but it's frequently used terms, so it's not huge. But there's something there at least. And then using that with the table of contents, you're going to be able to find what you're looking for. So we've got introduction, your table, your basics of play, movement, fire phase, combat phase, advance or retreat, rules to complete the basic game. So you could stop reading there, really, 66 pages in. Or you can then continue on to your advanced game. This just talks about playing with miniatures, any advanced rules that they add in, actual army building for the game, and then Scharnhorst. This is a campaign. This is built into this as well, and then also historical scenarios and just how to make those, and any other appendices, which are generally the quick reference sheets. Now what I'm going to do is I'm not going to go through every single page of this. I'm going to pick out a couple of bits and pieces, really, just to show you as we go ahead. So we've got the introduction, gives you the basics into, you know, your into how to play Blucher. One thing to mention is here you can have a quick reference PDF called Ignite Now, which is a free download on the Honor website. You can set this up and it basically tells you which troops have broken, which troops have, what your army morale is, what time of the day it is as well, because it's done on a 30 turn day, so it goes from beginning to end. A day starts at turn 1 and ends on turn 30, and that's generally when the battle ends. Some it might be shorter, because it depends on what time in the day they started, for example Waterloo for example. But you should really just print one of these things out. Easy to use. I laminated mine and just used dry white markers on it, but dead easy to do. So we've got all the information here, just of the basic overplay of gameplay. Now this is one thing that I don't like about Blucher, and that is in a game turn we have these very strict turn phases within the turn. So you have an information turn, then you have a movement phase, and then you have a fire phase, and you have a combat phase, and then you have the status phase. Now personally, I think I don't like a movement phase and a fire phase and a combat phase. I think these things are a little bit dated at this point. I think it's far better that a unit gets actions and can perform those actions in any order it wants, and then is expended after it has been activated. That is absolutely a personal thing, and I know a lot of people do like the old I go you go kind of way, and this is how Blucher plays. It is an I go you go game, very much so, but I kind of think mix it up a little bit just with that. I would also possibly as well think about adding in some kind of initiative roll at the start of each turn to see who gets to go first, just to break it up a little bit, and just to add a little bit more friction into the game itself. But that's by the by. I mean, that's my personal preference completely. I'm still quite happy, more than happy to play Blucher. I don't think, it's not going to be something that I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I still really like this game. I just have a few ideas about how to change things up. A couple of things here. Obviously these are all introductions, so it's just talking about the stuff that you need. This is kind of good for people who are new to wargaming, and this is very much a good introductory rule set really for wargaming. There's some very good examples of play throughout it, so it's very clear, it's very concise. There's Sam Mustafa is an academic anyway, so his writing style is very concise and very clear, as he has to be. So it kind of translates into the rules, but it's a very nice writing style as well, just to say on top of that. I really enjoyed writing it. There's a few little jokes here and there that pop out every so often. Here we are, there you go, there's a nice now sheet. Basically you download that, and as I say, it has all these different bits and pieces that it just tells you about the game. You don't really need it, but it's nice to have. I've got a couple, and also I have made measuring sticks as well for this. And here we have the cards. This is the unit cards. So this bit here is the important part. This is the elan that the units have, and as I say, here we've got the Young Guard under Chartrand. So this brigade has got an elan of 7, and then you can also see here it has a couple of the extras. These are modifiers for combat. So it has skirmishers, it has, I think that's shock, and I think that's also steady, if I remember correctly. So they just help it in combat, different combat. And then it also has its movement rates here, 2 and 1. Now the thing with movements in Blucher, everything is based on base widths, so you can use your existing figures. You don't have to rebase for Blucher, which is great. Basically you translate how wide your base is, and that becomes a base width. And then, so for example, Chartrand would move, doing a simple move they would move 2, doing a complicated move, I'll get onto those, they will move 1, and that's a base width. So in this case, because these bases are the cards, they're about 3 inches. So basically, if you just did a simple move, you'd move 6 inches. If you did a complicated move, you'd move 3 inches. Nice and easy. And then, as he mentions also, you can use these cards with Fog of War with the cards on the back as well, just to show that the unit is concealed. Then you flip it over when it becomes unconcealed, and you see it on that side. They're very easy. So these are the recommended game scales. So basically, one unit is 2,000 to 3,000 men, around 4 to 6 battalions. An understrength unit may have 3 battalions, an overstrength may have 6, for example. Then you also have 2,000 men for the cavalry, which is between 6 and 12 squadrons. Or 18 to 24 guns, which is 2 to 4 batteries. That's just the representation. Obviously your figures are just figures, so it doesn't really matter what they are, but you can bring it up or take it down if you really want to. You don't have to have it around that, but that's about best. About brigade size is good enough really, because it then fits into the whole core idea of activation, which I will get onto, because that's the interesting part, I think, of this game, as much as anything else is. So we talked a little bit about the cards and things. As I say, I'm not going to go through every single thing, because there's 170 odd pages in this, so there's a bit. I'll just, at least you can see, you know, what kind of stuff it is in the rules as you're buying it. It tells you how to set up the table, where you are if you're on or off the table, then also how to measure distances, and you basically measure from point to point really. It doesn't matter, it's quite abstract in that. You will notice as well that each of these units has this little tiny notch at the front. That is their centre point, about which they turn when they are moving. Terrain obviously is a big part of the game, but again, it's not hugely difficult to remember these different types of terrain, what they do to you and how they affect your units as they're moving. Line of sight is important, specifically for if you've spotted a unit that is concealed or not, and objectives are always a typical part of any game really. And I mentioned it already, we've got the clock here. It tells you up to 30 turns basically, and when it's 30 turns, that's not 30 turns per player, that's 15 turns per player. So I go, you go, I go, you go, as you know. And we've already gone through the game turn, so I'm not going to go through that. The other thing as well that's interesting in Blucher is the army morale. You don't fight until the last man, you fight until a third of your infantry and cavalry units have been destroyed. You don't include your artillery units on that, so you basically add up your infantry and your cavalry and then divide it by 3, round it up, and that's your army morale. So if say you have 25 infantry cavalry units, your army morale is going to be 9, for example, because you're rounding up. So once 9 of units have been destroyed, it's game over, your army collapses, and they will start falling back anyway, whether they captured an objective or not. And it talks about a little bit about the information phases, where you see if units are revealed or not. Units will basically sit on the table. I don't really use this. It's a bit of fog of war. It's quite a nice little system though, a nice simple blind system, in that you basically put the unit face down, because if you're using cards, and you can then replace them with your figures if you want to. But basically it does help. We played it a few times in the past, and it does help with kind of pushing your enemy towards or away from where you want them to go. So you can kind of threaten with what looks like a load of cavalry on the edge, so they're not going to come near you. And it's quite a nice little bit of fog of war. You're not entirely sure what those units are on that hill. Are they black or are they blue? It's nice for that kind of thing, and at this level it really works, I think. What is interesting and what I really like about this game is also the friction that is added in as well, and this is the MO, which is momentum. Now, depending on how big a game is, it's based on points. So you can have 100, 200, 300 point game. And depending on how many points you have, your opponent rolls a certain amount of momentum dice. For every 100 points of the game, and I think the average game is probably about 200 points, that would certainly last for an evening, 2 or 3 hours. You roll D6, and then they conceal that number, and that is how many momentum you have for the turn, but you don't actually know it. What happens is every time you activate a unit, and you activate by different types of activations. First of all, you activate by core, then you activate by individual units, and then also by command, which will automatically end the phase anyway. If you activate a unit by core, they have to be from the same core, and they also have to be within a certain distance, which is a base width. And for every unit that you activate, it costs you 1 momentum. So say you've got 9 units in your core, it will cost you 9 to activate all of those. Then, after you've done all your core core activations, you go on to individual units. They will cost you 2 per individual unit. Then finally, it's the command, which is basically the commander. If he's within a certain distance of his units, he can then command them, and they don't cost anything, but it will automatically end the turn no matter what. Now, what happens is You will go work through each of your cores and then your individual movements, and at the time once you've finished activating, so let's say we got a core with, let's say we got 3 core, each have got 9 units in, it's quite a big game. I activate my first core and that cost me 9 momentum. I don't know how many momentum I've got, and only the opponent does. So I have to ask him, I say, can I continue playing? And if I have 10 or more momentum left, then I can. Otherwise, I've stopped, and that's it. That ends my turn. So they will then tell you if you can carry on going. Now, the way it works is, if say, let's say for example, we have 11 momentum, but I've just used up 9 moving a core. I say, right, I want to move this other core of 9 here. Because it's a core move, although it's costing me 9, I can still move them because I'm moving them as a core, but that will then take me over the momentum level, if that makes sense. Because you're activating the entire core together. So it's all about, the game is really about forcing the player to use core as they would have been done, you know, which they're using them, moving them together and trying to get them across the table. Once they start breaking up into individual units, it becomes a lot harder to manage your army, and you kind of want to get them back together into their core formations as quick as possible, you know, if you've got a break in the line, for example. So that is a really, really nice way of doing it, and I really like the momentum part of the game. And as I say, the last thing to do is just you do with the Commander-in-Chief marker, and basically they will just activate whatever's around them, and then that ends a turn anyway. So it's the last thing. So it's a really nice little system of friction, which really works very well, and then tied in with that fog of war on the blinds as well. So let's just jump through first of all. So movement, I've already mentioned it, it's pretty simple. You pretty much have 2 kinds of movements, well, 3 movements, actually no, 4 movements. I'll go through each one of them though. Simple and difficult movements are going to be the usual ones. Simple movement is you pivot on your central point and move forward whatever your simple movement is. A difficult move is if you do anything else, or if you're moving through rough terrain like woods or something like that, and then you will only move 1 base width instead of 2 if you're in infantry. Then the other thing is the reserve move. So I'm not going to go into detail on the movement because there's quite a lot of it, but reserve move is quite an interesting one as well. This allows a unit that is out of line of sight and out of spotting distance to move up to, I think it's 14 base widths, no, 12 base widths, sorry. So in my case, my base widths are 3, so that would be 36 inches, 3 foot, and you can basically drag a unit from almost one side of the table to the other behind all your men. So it's like you're quickly reinforcing an area that has yet to be, where you need you need a fresh unit or 2, and you just push them in quickly, and then you can push them forward. And that's a really nice little system that just kind of books the normal trend of the movement. But obviously they become revealed once they've done that movement, so you can't actually do it again, but you can at least get them to where they need to be on the tabletop if you need. The other move is just the charge move, which is when you're moving in to attack an opponent. One thing you can't do in this is move and fire, so you can either move or fire, and that's it. So you either fire or you attack or you charge, and charging is much more devastating than firing, because firing with muskets is pretty desultory, to be honest. You've got to roll 6s to hit. But let's just have a quick look through. Let's come through these. So a few more rules here just about the actual the movements and things like that. And then we've got the firing. And as I say, firing is split into pretty simple things. You've got infantry firing and artillery firing, and you have distances. All again, once again in base widths. So infantry fire, volley fire at 1 base width, then over that up to 2 base width is skirmish fire. So again, for me, that's 6 inch, 3 inch and 6 inch. Then we've got artillery fire, 2 base widths is short range, up to 8 base width is long range. And you can do the sums on that one. Very simple. You just have to you measure from point to point, and that's if you can hit, as long as you can see them. And it is incredibly simple to do. You fire by rolling the amount of elan you have, or for artillery it's how many cannonballs they have left, and these are slightly different to the elan because they go down in different numbers. You can see here, so it's got 4, 4, 3, 2, 2. So as each one, every time a cannon fires, it crosses off one of these. So it's running out of ammunition, it's getting tired, all that kind of thing is kind of tied into that. Elan does the same thing in that, you know, whatever your elan is, that's how many dice you roll. If you're skirmishing, you halve the number of dice. If you have some bonuses, so heavy artillery, firepower or skirmish, it means that any 5 that you also roll, as long as 6 as well as the 6s, is also a hit as well. And firepower is at close range, volley range, skirmish is at skirmish range. And that's pretty much how it works. Really nice, really simple, and then every hit reduces your enemy's elan by 1. The big thing is combat, because, you know, standing there just shooting and trying to roll 6s at one another is just never going to get anybody anywhere at any time. So combat phase is a big thing. And this, once again, is dead easy. You basically count up how much your elan is. Any modifiers that you have, and these pluses here give you dice. So let's say you've got an elan of 6, but you also have the shock trait and you're attacking, so you get another 1, so that becomes 7. But you are in difficult terrain, you're -1, so that becomes a 6 again. You roll the dice, any 4s up are hits. The defender rolls their number of dice depending on their elan and also any other modifications, and 4s up are hits. Basically, if the attacker gets more hits, then they've won, and they push the defender back, and the defender bounces off with the difference in the hits taken on their elan. But the attacker will always take an elan hit as well. So even attacking is always going to slowly wear you well. If the defender ties or wins, then the attacker will take 2 elan hits, but the defender will also take 1 as well. But the attacker then bounces back as well. Generally, your first attack against fresh troops is never going to work, so you kind of have to do at least 2 attacks against it, which means you are slowly grinding down your own troops as well. And it gets even more difficult as well if the troops are actually in a built-up area, because they get a +2 on their dice. You get a -1 if you're attacking automatically. So it's very difficult to actually get them out with a single attack. You can be lucky and do it, obviously. Involuntary movement is basically retreating after an attack or after combat, kind of thing. Very simple. Depending if you are the passive or the active player, depends on which way you face after you've retreated, and that's really, really nice and simple. You know, you pick this stuff up very quickly. So then the other stuff I've already mentioned it here is the urban terrains. Urban areas are basically made up of base widths. So in my case it's 3 inch by 3 inch, and they're just made up of you put them together. Excuse me. So a single urban base is a village, 2 bases together a town, 3 or more bases together is called a city. It's that simple, and you just put them down as little blocks. You can either make your own little vignettes or whatever. And then we've got stuff like river crossings. There's not so much about roads, because at this level roads don't really matter, but bridges certainly do, but not roads themselves. And so we've got here, we're talking, it talks a little bit about quick setup and pick up games as well you want to play, just a quick description of those. And then we move into the advanced game. So the advanced game covers quite a lot of stuff, playing with miniatures, advanced rules that just add a little bit more to the game itself, army building, then Sean hosts the campaign. So I'm going to skip through some of this stuff because it's not particularly necessary for this review really, but I'm just talking about, you know, how you can actually put miniatures on the table, which obviously is what everybody wants to do anyway. And then you basically just, you know, how you reduce or increase your base width to fit the table size that you got. So you could actually play this on quite a small table. You just create, you know, a smaller base width rule. Basically, it's entirely up to you. So rules changes for miniatures. There's only a few bits and pieces here. Just like stacking into penetration, and also just for concealment as well, using those cards. But the advanced rules also cover weather and seasons, various scale variations, reinforcements, entrenchments, multiplayer games, mixed brigades, rallying, artillery, over and under strength units, which basically just add or take away dice when you're attacking, army exhaustion, CNC personalities, and also sub-commanders. So I'll skip through some of this because, as I say, these are just extra bits and pieces you can shove in, and it's all here really. I mean, it's all, you know, you don't need any extra supplements or whatever, what have you, for adding any of these bits in here. And these are just little bits and pieces that you can add more flavour to the game if you want. And one of these things is really the CNCs, so you can have your commander-in-chief, and then you can also have sub-commanders as well, and these guys can do stuff. They have various skills or traits, and they will interact with your troops on the tabletop as well, which is quite nice. Sub-commanders have different personalities. For example, you know, hero, inspiring, vigorous, steadfast. So you can really get, you know, fellas from history and just shove them on your tabletop. And, you know, so there, for example, we've got Murat. He's cavalry and inspiring, but he costs 15 points. So he's quite an expensive fella, but worthwhile having. Then we've got the section on army building, and just really how to set things up and how to put stuff together. I think one of the things I would possibly argue with this is that there's no specific scenarios. Just one scenario would have been nice, I think, but there aren't any. But there are lots of suggestions as to how to make those scenarios. So I think that's just one other thing. Then we go on to the actual army building, and also how to read the army list as well. Let's just get through some of this stuff, how you use various bits and pieces, and then we start with the actual army list themselves. So we're starting here with the Austrians. You have to have a minimum number of corps, which is generally 3. How many artillery units you would have in those, how small your corps can be, minimum, and then also a maximum number of sub-commanders as well, and any other extra rules that they have, any of the traits with those particular units, those particular pieces. So there we've got the British army list here. So that's 1815 British army list. And what's interesting with the British army list is it's split into Portuguese, the Peninsular campaign or the 100 Days campaign. So if it's in blue with a H, that's where they're in 100 days. If it's P, it's Peninsular. If it's unmarked, then it can go in any campaign as well. So it's just a little bit of period flavour there for the British. French lists. French are split into early war, 1805 to 1812. With all the stuff that they have and their commanders. And then we also have the French army lists, late war, 1813 to 14. So this is not the 100 days yet, but they are in there. And then I thought we had the 100 days in here, but obviously not. But we also have the Ottoman army list as well, so you can stick some Ottomans in if you want to, really. The Prussians, early war, 1806 to 07. Prussian army list 13 to 15 as well, so including the 100 days war there. Then we got the Russian army list as well. We got, as I say, each one of these has special rules for these specific armies. Spanish army list, if you want to go into, and there is actually, just to mention, there is actually a Spanish or Peninsular War set of cards. So again, you don't need to buy a load of figures. You can just buy those sets of cards, and they've got Spanish infantry in them. I keep meaning to have a game with those. I just never got round to it. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people really, really rate about Blucher. And I'll be 100% honest here. I haven't actually played the campaign with Blucher, but I've read it and I know how it works, and I've seen enough about it as to how it works. And it's a very simple campaign system. You draw up a map basically, and then use you pile your units into different columns, and then they move about, but the enemy doesn't actually know what's in the columns. So this is how you work your columns together. So they could be anything from one brigade all the way up to, you know, a full corps quite easily, but your enemy doesn't know what they are. So this is what you're moving about on the map board, and then when you come into contact, so you can see here creating the columns, when they come into contact, well, they'll see, you know, potentially how many units there are, but they won't know what they are. And that's the thing, you know, 9 brigades moving about is going to be a lot more obvious than 1 brigade moving about. So that's kind of how it works. But then as soon as you come into contact, you begin a battle on 2 squares of the thing. So you just keep moving around until one or the other wins the campaign. So that's pretty much how the campaign works, and it's that fog of war that is probably the standout part of it. The fact that your enemy has no idea what they're up against. You've got to do some kind of reconnaissance at least, and try to check out the enemy before they go into the attack, or attack the smaller stuff, I guess. And you can see here we've got plenty of examples and how scope and overruns and all that kind of stuff as well. The other thing as well is reinforcements as well, that you can actually bring in the campaign during a battle. So if you've got people close by, they could actually bring them in as part of the same game, which is quite nice as well. So you're not just forced to fight with the same units that you have on the tabletop. So that's pretty much it, really. That brings us to the end. It's just talking about the terrain types and things, and various other bits and pieces, terrain placement and stuff in the campaign itself, and how you set up and your victory in the campaign as well, and then an example here of how the campaign itself will play through. One of the final parts is the historical scenarios. So this just talks about how to design your scenario, and it's already gone through it anyway. It tells you here, how many men are in each unit, so you can work it out from a historical order of battle as to how many units you're going to have on the table, which is quite a nice way of doing stuff, because you're playing a historical war game. You'd probably want to do a historical war game. I do apologise. I overlooked this. I'd forgotten about this. There is actually already a scenario in here as well, so you can play this on a 6x4. And this is the Fuentes de Ororos battle, Oro or non Oro, and then you have the orders of battle as well, so you can actually play this out quite easily just on the tabletop using the cards. A few extra notes and things like that. I probably should do this at some point, actually, just thinking about it, it's reminded me. And then we get finally onto the appendices. We've got a load of facts, frequently asked questions, which, anything that people that come up when people are reading through rules. There's quite a lot, and that's what we've got. 13 facts, and the last one is actually I figured out the perfect cheat. So we then also, just in the appendices, we've also just got the summary of the rules themselves, and these are quick reference sheets. I think somebody else has probably already done some of these somewhere on the internet and put them together, just so you can just print them out quite easily. There might be some on the Honor website itself, but everything is pretty much here. As I say, most of it, after a couple of turns, you can pretty much hold it in your head anyway, so it's not particularly difficult set of rules to play. It's more about the choices you're making and the decisions, and the friction, as well as the fog of war that comes into it. Let's say, I think it's a terrific game. I think it's really, really good. It sets out to do something. It's abstracted enough, and I know quite a few people have played using the American Civil War with Blucher. Because there's very little difference, I guess, between brigades at that level. I'd keep it pretty much in line with the Napoleonic Wars, but I know some people have very successfully played elsewhere with it, in other wars and things. But I think it's a great set of rules. It's a really good way of introducing somebody new to Napoleonic warfare, and also just to have that really big, eagle eye down on a battle, such as, you can play Waterloo on a 6x4 table using Blucher if you really want to. You could play Borodino on a 6x4 table if you wanted to. You just reduce the base size or the base width measurement. So yeah, dead easy to do, really nice and lovely laid out as well. I think it's worth the money it is. He's a small printer, small producer of rules, and Sam Mustafa always has something interesting in there. My only problem with it, as I say, it's I go, you go, and that's just because I'm not particularly a fan of I go, you go. But I've thought of ways of mixing up and making, for me at least, a little bit more interesting. Right, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have done, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Do check out my Patreon and also channel memberships, because all the money that goes into those goes back into the channel and just tries to make videos a little bit better for future. And I shall wrap up there and say thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next Storm of Steel video.